Coming up on today's Locked On Dodgers, we got some stuff to talk about. Ken Rosenthal had a report of the Dodgers' interest in Kolten Wong, which makes sense, but the rest of the report doesn't make as much sense. Dave Roberts was on a podcast talking about Miguel Vargas and Trey Turner and Gavin Lux and the shortstop situation. So we're going to get into all of that, and that's what's on tap. So make sure to keep it Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yo, Dodger fans. Welcome to Locked On Dodgers. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 local sports daily podcast network. Locked On, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. This is the daily podcast covering the Los Angeles Dodgers, bringing you the smart fans' perspective on our boys in blue. You can find us wherever you find podcasts and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. If you want to make it easy on yourself, subscribe in both of those places, and you'll never miss a day because you know we're not going to. And because it is a Monday through Friday, we are here, Jeff and I'm Vince Samperio. This is your first time listening or watching. That's Jeff Snider, and we're here to talk about the Dodgers. We are both lifelong Dodger fans that currently cover the team in a couple of ways, one of those ways being this podcast, and I've covered the team for a few years now, being in the press box in the locker room and doing all that fun stuff, as well as being fans of the Dodgers. So we've been able to do a lot covering the Dodgers, and now we're here to talk about the Dodgers every Monday through Friday for about 30 minutes. So that's what we're going to do today. And, Jeff, we actually have some kind of news, rumors-ish to talk about. Dave Roberts was on a podcast with Jason Stark and Doug Landville. He said a few things there we'll get into a little bit later. And then Ken Rosenthal, in his latest What I'm Hearing report, mentioned the Dodgers and a second baseman. But before that, Jeff, hey, how's it going?
Oh, it's going pretty well. Yeah, it is always more fun. We talked yesterday about how the winter meetings will at least give us exciting stuff to talk about, and got started a little bit early today thanks to Jason Stark and Ken Rosenthal, I guess. Yeah. Actually, but before we move on to that, I felt bad yesterday that I talked about taking a picture with Hacksaw Jim Duggan at the winter meetings and didn't share it. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can see it now. There's me with Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and as promised, I am bigger than him. This was, you could tell it's a while ago because I had brown hair. And yeah, so there's me and Hacksaw Jim Duggan, in case you were wondering what that might look like.
There you go. All right, so Ken Rosenthal in his What I'm Hearing, which you've been putting out almost every day or every other day or so, mentions the Dodgers, and he says that the Dodgers are capable of pivoting in virtually any direction, which is just how they like it. He mentioned Clayton Kershaw, or he mentioned, with Clayton Kershaw's deal, they're still about $45 million under the first luxury tax threshold, and that it's very possible that they sign one of the top free agents pitchers for a short-term high-dollar deal. But then he mentioned one possible scenario, which seems a little bit of sources and a little bit of him projecting, which would makes this half and half here. He said, quote, one possible scenario, trade for Brewers second baseman Kolten Wong, a player the Dodgers like, according to Major League sources, sign one of the big four free agent shortstops, play Gavin Lux at third. So the report is from sources that the Dodgers are interested in Kolten Wong. The rest of the report is not necessarily a report, but Ken Rosenthal, providing his top tier analysis that you always mention on here. And I don't know why he would think that would be an option the Dodgers would do, but that's what we're here for, to discuss it.
Yeah, I obviously I hope everybody listens to our podcast, but just for the next 10 minutes or so, I hope Ken Rosenthal doesn't. Come on, that's like the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Kolten Wong makes a ton of sense at second base. Very good defensive second baseman. His defense did dip a little bit last year, but 1 year defensive stats, I don't know. But, with the shift being banned, a guy with Wong's range would make a ton of sense for the Dodgers at second base. That's where it stops making sense, though. And as you alluded to, I respect Ken Rosenthal for a lot of things. I think he's cream of the crop as far as baseball insiders go. He's got the connections, he's got the contacts. He knows who to ask questions and what questions to ask. his actual baseball analysis sometimes leaves something to be desired. And why would the Dodgers move their fastest player to third base? Like, of all the positions on the baseball field, I think third base is the second worst for a guy with the athleticism of Gavin Lux, behind only first base. Uh, it wouldn't make sense at all. And Gavin Lux, he hit better last year. His bat is starting to come along, but he's only a good hitter for a middle infielder right now. He is not a good enough hitter to be a star at third base. So they would be wasting his athleticism. They would be putting him in a position where he actually is less valuable. Just like, I have a hard time believing anybody who knows anything about baseball said to Ken Rosenthal, the Dodgers could play Gavin Lux at third base. I feel, it just doesn't make any sense to me, Vince.
Yeah, I mean, not for the things you mentioned, for the throwing woes, which maybe have been a little overblown by Dodger fans, but still, just the thought of Gavin Lux having to throw the ball from across the diamond when he, sometimes short arms the ball, it doesn't make sense in that, it makes sense for if they don't get a shortstop, a big name shortstop, and they have Kolten Wong at second base and Gavin Lux play shortstop, which is something Dave Roberts did talk about, which we'll get into in the next segment. But, for that reason, it would have made more sense for him to say then it opens up Gavin Lux to be traded for a pitcher or an outfielder. And, that would make a lot more sense than him. Pretty much any other scenario other than him playing third base makes a lot more sense than him playing third base.
And I wonder where in this scenario Max Muncy plays in Ken Rosenthal's mind. Like, Max Muncy exists. Max Muncy actually, when he's right, actually hits well enough to be a third baseman and plays a solid third base and has the kind of athleticism that makes sense at third base. Like, if you had Kolten Wong,
DH and no Turner,
I guess, yeah. It seems silly, a guy who can play three different defensive positions, to make him your full-time DH. So, it's just a kind of a baffling proposal on so many levels. And like, all I could do is laugh when I read it. I'm like, our buddy Brandon Johnson, I don't know if you saw on Twitter, Vince, Brandon Johnson quote tweeted Ken Rosenthal's tweet. And he just said, if the Dodgers trade for Wong and play Lux at third, at Snider will eat his own shoe. And I responded and I said, both of them. I will eat two shoes if Gavin Lux is the Dodgers starting third baseman in 2023.
Yeah, it doesn't seem likely at all. And it also, another thing we're going to talk about later is Miguel Vargas, and, where's he going to end up playing, because he does play third base, and he also, I guess, can technically play outfield and DH. But so it doesn't make a lot of sense without a lot of other things happening. And it's just like, oh, wait, we don't have a third base.
Like six people dying. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, Kolten Wong would make sense on this roster, but not for that scenario, just for the scenario of not having a shortstop or opening up Gavin Lux to be traded.
Yeah. All right. Somebody tell Rosenthal he can put his earbuds back in. We're done talking about him.
Yeah. Next, we're going to talk about the shortstop position and about Trey Turner and Gavin Lux and what Dave Roberts said. But first, let's talk about BetOnline, because today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline.net. They're your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. They've got all the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer to esports. They've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, they also have those there. So head to betonline.net, where it's the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today on your laptop or mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube.
Wait, breaking news, Vince.
Right.
As we're recording this, Ken Rosenthal just updated his article. I don't know if you're familiar with Gallegos on Twitter. He tweeted at Rosenthal and said, hey, if Gavin Lux will not play third base next year. If he does, I'll eat a hot dog with ketchup on it, which is a very inside Twitter joke. And Rosenthal responded and said, "Point taken, I'm adjusting." So I looked at the article, and it now says, one possible trade scenario: trade for Brewers second baseman Kolten Wong, a player the Dodgers like, according to Major League sources, sign one of the big four free agent shortstops, play Max Muncy, and perhaps even Gavin Lux at third. So he's waffling a little bit. He still has maybe and perhaps even Gavin Lux. 5 too many words in the sentence, but it makes a little bit more sense now.
Yeah, there it makes sense. And where it would make more sense to play Gavin Lux would be shortstop. And Dave Roberts was on the podcast with Jason Stark and Doug Lamb, and the shortstop position came up. And this is a quote from Dave Roberts, quote, "If it doesn't work with Trey, we have one of our homegrown guys in Gavin Lux who we're probably looking at to fill in at short." And then he also added, "I loved having Trey with us." And, that makes more sense than playing Gavin Lux at third base. This is also something that Andrew Friedman, talked about a few weeks ago in mentioning Gavin Lux as a possible shortstop. And, we talked about it back then of how we don't think that's going to happen still. We can't really see them handing over the reins shortstop to Gavin Lux. But with all the reports and all the links and everything else, and the Dodgers have, optionality and flexibility and all the words, everything else, I guess there's a scenario where they improve the rest of the roster around him enough to where him playing shortstop wouldn't really cost you, at the plate he can hit, and then on defense wouldn't cost you as much because you can have trust in him because you feel like you're going to score runs, or you feel like he can do it and he's been a shortstop before.
Yeah, I think I probably have more faith in Lux as a shortstop than a lot of Dodger fans do. He's had his issues at second base, and I've probably said on this show, I think those are overblown a little bit. I think people make errors sometimes, and for him, it's maybe more a concentration thing than anything else at times. But I don't think it necessarily follows that because he has struggled defensively at a new position that he would struggle worse at his natural position. Even though it is a longer throw, it is the position he came up playing. And you remember in the minor leagues, he actually had some throwing issues at shortstop. In 2018, he struggled a lot. But in 2019, the year that he was minor league player of the year in all of baseball, he cut his errors in half at shortstop. Like he overcame his defensive issues at shortstop. And he was minor league player of the year as a shortstop. And a lot of that was because he hit the cover off the ball. But I think Gavin Lux would be just fine as a major league shortstop. I don't think he would win any gold gloves unless he changed his name to Derek Jeter, because then you can win gold gloves while being, mediocre at defense. But I think that Gavin Lux would be, I think if he is the Dodgers shortstop in 2023, he will be a defensive shortstop than Corey Seager was. And the Dodgers have shown that they're willing to play with, they don't need a gold glover at shortstop if he can hit. And so Lux would be fine. And I think the Dodgers are being sincere and truthful when they say that they would be comfortable turning it over to him. I also think there's definitely some gamesmanship here, because if you publicly say, we don't know what we're going to do about shortstop, man, we got to find somebody. That takes away your leverage in trades, in free agent negotiations, all that. That it makes sense for their public position to be, we're fine. We don't need anybody. If something happens, great, but we're going to be just fine if we don't sign somebody or trade for somebody, and then adjust from there. And I think that's also best for Gavin Lux. If he does end up as a shortstop, he will do better there and feel better about it if the Dodgers spent the whole offseason saying, yeah, we're totally fine with Gavin Lux as shortstop.
Yeah, my only concern, and this is, the pessimistic side of it, is if Gavin Lux is your starting shortstop, that could possibly mean the Dodgers got a really good outfielder to play in the outfield, or a really good second baseman to play second base, or whatever the case is, or a top tier starting pitcher. They improved somewhere else on the roster instead of shortstop. Is that you're banking on his defense, which, it can be said questionable, maybe not as questionable, like you said, as others, but can be labeled as questionable at this point. We just don't know. We haven't seen him play shortstop that much in a while either. The other part is you're banking on him replicating his first half last year and being a really good hitter. Obviously he had the injury, and when he came back, he wasn't as strong. Second half of the season, he OPS'd under 700. Last month of the season, he hit about 150 and, didn't do too much. But it's a matter of, like I said, if he is a shortstop, I believe that there is one big improvement coming somewhere else, and whether it's in the lineup or as a starting pitcher. And I think that reduces it a little bit. But if not, I still think, you're banking on him. And that's what you have to do with young guys. Sometimes you have to bank on them. We'll talk about Miguel Vargas in a little bit, and the Dodgers might be banking on him. And, they've banked on guys in the past, and Seager and Bellinger and Jock Peterson and other guys in the past, Walker Buehler on the mound and everyone else. So at some point, you have to bank on Gavin Lux and say, okay, here, this is your shot. And, if it doesn't work out, there's going to be shortstops, readily available if needed, or, trades can be made, or whatever the case is. Or the very least, let's say if he struggles a lot, they have, Chris Taylor can fill in that shortstop if they need it. But yeah, that would be my only concern, is that you're banking on everything kind of coming to fruition for Gavin Lux. And not a bad thing to be optimistic about that, but you also got to be a little bit realistic.
Yeah. And for me, I don't see it quite as much as banking on it, because, and maybe it's because I'm older. And so I grew up in a time when shortstop was a defense, not just a defense first position, but a defense only position. Like, Ozzie Smith was a first ballot Hall of Famer. The dude couldn't hit for most of his career. He turned into a decent hitter by the end, but he couldn't hit. Shortstops weren't expected to hit. It wasn't until Alex Rodriguez and Nomar Garciaparra and Derek Jeter and them came along, it was like, oh, shortstops can hit and play defense. Let's do that, And so, I think the Dodgers would be fine even with what they have right now, even if they didn't add anything else. Playing Gavin Lux at shortstop as a defense-ish first shortstop, he's got the athleticism, and he could be a solid hitter and a solid defender. And I think we give him what the rest of what the Dodgers have on their roster. I think a guy who can hit solidly and field solidly at shortstop is more than enough. Obviously, we'll take more. If he could hit great and play great defense, that would be great. If they can sign one of the big guys, that's great too. But I don't think you necessarily need an all-star caliber play from every single position.
That's true. They did have all-star caliber at shortstop, and it didn't work out. So, that's one way to look at it too, if you want to just stay on the downside of everything.
All right. You can be pessimistic.
No, I'm just saying that's one way to look at it if you're going to head into the season with Gavin Lux as your shortstop. But, here we're not – if tomorrow was opening day and Gavin Lux is starting shortstop, we're obviously going to be happy about it. We're going to be fine with it. But, yeah, so for the sake of the podcast, we're going to look at both sides.
Yep.
All right. Yeah, Miguel Vargas, next topic of conversation. But real quick, thanks for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen of the day every day. Check out Locked On Sports Today, wherever you get podcasts, and on YouTube. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts as well if you search for Locked On Dodgers. All right, so in that same podcast that Dave Roberts was on, he mentioned Miguel Vargas, and the quote was, quote, Miguel Vargas is someone who next year is going to play for us a lot. He needs a look, he needs a runway, and we're going to do that for him. This also goes along with what's been said, by others in so far in this offseason, Andrew Friedman as well. And now it's a matter of, okay, we know Miguel Vargas, from everything that's been said, is going to get playing time. Where's that playing time going to come? And, is he going to be an everyday player? Is he going to be a most of the time player? I guess the Dodgers, other than Freddie Freeman and Mookie Betts and last year Trey Turner, they don't technically have any real everyday players. But for everyday player, as much as the Dodgers is, Jeff, are we going to see Miguel Vargas? Where do you think?
My best guess is left field. The one knock on him all throughout the minor leagues, the scouting report was always the same. He can hit. He's an awesome hitter, and we have no idea what he's going to do defensively. And, the consensus was he's probably not good enough at third base to play third base in the major leagues. And, I feel like, especially depending on, if they have Gavin Lux at shortstop, I don't know if you're really ready to take a risk on both left side of the infield guys. And, like we talked about with Max Muncy, Muncy is probably going to be their starting third baseman. And, I feel like left field is a position that Vargas could learn to play well enough to hold his own out there. We saw him out in left field some last year, and at times it looked fine, and at times it looked less fine. We know he's actually pretty fast, which so he's got the athleticism to play out there. It's just a matter of, I don't know about like reading a fly ball. I don't know if that's a skill that everybody can develop. I know that not everybody on every little league team can develop it. But in the major leagues, I assume that you can turn a guy into a left fielder. And, that's the same assumption that whoever the Red Sox made with Hanley Ramirez, and we saw how that turned out. But most of the time, most guys who've moved to the outfield because they don't have whatever it takes to play the infield again or anymore, I think that usually works out. And so I think Miguel Vargas could probably turn into a reasonably adequate left fielder and a guy whose bat would more than make up for any defensive issues.
I mean, all you got to look at is the left fielders in the World Series. And you had Yordan Alvarez in left field, and you had Kyle Schwarber in left field for the most part. And those guys are by no means defensive stalwarts. But, actually Kyle Schwarber looked pretty solid in the postseason. I didn't watch him during the regular season. I know that him and Castellanos in the outfield were supposed to be an issue before the season started. Castellanos actually made some decent plays out there as well in the postseason. So, guys can be well. I mean, even with the Dodgers, we've seen Manny Ramirez play left field, and we've seen, the third, fourth, fifth years of Jock Peterson in left field, which, became a little bit of an adventure toward the end and has been an adventure on his other teams in the last few years. And, we've seen, and even Gavin Lux, Matt Kemp, even Gavin Lux and, his short time out there. It's one of those where Lux got thrown into it in a tough spot. And I think if they said, hey, we want you to be an outfielder, he would be fine at the end of the day. It just was thrown into a really tough spot at the time. And then I believe that's probably what they're doing with Vargas this offseason is, hey, you're going to play left field, go learn left field. Take, 100 fly balls every day, whatever the case is. Go to the stadium and work out and, play balls off the wall and in the corner and everything else, and blah, blah, blah. And, realistically, for a guy like Vargas, who, we've heard nothing but good things about his work ethic and about, his exuberance and everything else, you would imagine he's going to be fine if he does go out there in left field. And I think that is where they're going to play him. Realistically, right now, the big holes are center field and shortstop in, varying degrees, and they can fill those holes by, filling other holes. Let's say they got a top tier corner outfielder, and then they figured out center field with someone lesser, or they got a top tier second baseman and they filled out shortstop with someone like whatever the case is. But yeah, I think left field makes more sense for Vargas, and I'm excited to see him get the at-bats. Last year he didn't quite get the at-bats we thought when he came up in that last month of the season, but, he did enough and he impressed enough to take away the roster position of Hanser Alberto in the playoffs. He didn't really get to do much out there, but I'm excited to see. It's been a few years now. Gavin Lux is we don't know exactly yet, and he's filled, been adequate and been pretty good in other times, but we haven't had a guy like come up in a few years on the offensive side and really show something. And I'm excited to see if Miguel Vargas can be that guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the nice things about it being a Major League Baseball player is there are people available to help you. If Miguel Vargas goes to Arizona, goes to Glendale, goes to Camelback Ranch, there is somebody there who will hit him fly balls, as many as he wants. And he doesn't have to wait for his dad to get home from work to come play catch with him. There's somebody whose job it is to help him learn how to play left field. And there's no lockout this year. There's nothing keeping him from doing everything he can to become a good left fielder, or at least a passable left fielder. And yeah, I feel like left field is the place you can hide a guy. They played with him at second base some in the minor leagues. He played some first base, obviously, but that's not going to happen with the Dodgers. And so left field, it makes sense. And, with his athleticism, I feel like he could actually become a good left fielder if he puts in the work, and not even just a Kyle Schwarber type. He's good enough. But, I think he's got, at his age and his athleticism, he could become a good left fielder, and combine that with what we think he's going to be able to do at the plate. That would be pretty awesome.
Yeah, like you mentioned about reading the ball off the bat. for a lot of people, or for some people it's natural, for some people it's not, but it is a skill I believe you can learn. And I think that's something that even last year when we saw with him, it was not really getting to the ball. It was the fact that he was a couple of steps behind because he had to adjust first in order to get to the ball. So,
Yeah.
That's something that, like I said, a 100 fly balls a day can fix, because, I've seen it done in older players, and not major league players. These are just older players in general. So if they can do it, Miguel Vargas can definitely do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So a couple other things that Dave Roberts talked about, and we can touch on real quick. Dave Roberts mentioned about, they asked him about a traditional closer this offseason. He said they have a lot of guys that can finish out games. He doesn't see the Dodgers going that route of a traditional closer, which is something we talked about. And he's mentioned that he's done some Zooms with some free agent pitchers. And one of those free agent pitchers that we know of that he's had a Zoom with is Justin Verlander. John Heyman once again reported that it seems like it's between the Dodgers and Astros for Verlander. The Astros haven't, at least not on the surface, shown too much interest in bringing Verlander back. It seems like they're content with rolling with the rest of their guys that they have, and using that money elsewhere. They already used it for Jose Abreu, and I've seen even Cody Bellinger's been linked over there a little bit. So yeah, Jeff, I mean, the pitching, it's nothing new for us and nothing we haven't talked about, but just, hearing Dave Roberts mention it always adds a little bit more of that oomph to it.
Yeah. The quote about the closer, the way I read it was him saying that, when he said, I don't think we'll go that route. I thought he was referring to go the route of going out and getting a traditional closer, not necessarily ruling out using a traditional closer, just meaning we're not going to go get somebody like last year. They went and traded for Craig Kimbrell. And that makes sense because this year, the two biggest names available are Craig Kimbrell and Kenley Jansen. And, been there, done that. And so, I still hope they will go closer by committee and go with matchups. Or, if they do go with an internal option, I hope it's Daniel Hudson. I really don't want them to move Evan Phillips to closer. I really like the role that he filled, and I think he bought into it and excelled in that role. Daniel Hudson, I think, with his age and injury history, maybe it would make sense to have him be more of a set role. And so maybe that kills two birds with one stone. So I think they might use a traditional closer. They're just not going to go get somebody for that role.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the other thing we learned, not too much unless you're counting payroll, is that Shelby Miller's deal was reportedly $1.5 million with a chance for some incentives there. So
yeah, $100,000 in potential bonus, which, presumably that would be based on appearances, because they can't do it based on actual quality of play. That's not allowed. And so it's almost always appearances. So I would assume something like $20,000 each for each of 20, 30, 40, 50, and 60 appearances or something like that.
Yeah. And, with that, I talked about it last week and I mentioned that it was going to be a cheap deal. And the thing about these cheap deals is if it doesn't work out, you can very easily cut bait and, your losses won't be too much. 1.5 million to the Dodgers is like $10 to us. So
yep,
not a big deal.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, Jeff, anything from the day that we saw or that you saw?
No, there was plenty going on, and, we probably could have done a 3-hour episode today. But, we try to keep it to a half hour, and, there'll be plenty more to talk about. The next time we talk, the winter meetings will have already started, and, who knows what will have happened, but I think our next several episodes starting on Monday are going to be kind of action packed, a lot of rumors and stuff, and maybe even some actual news to talk about.
Yeah, the other thing, and not so much with the Dodgers, but for Aaron Judge watch, John Morosi reported that it's basically a 50-50 shot between Giants and Yankees at this point, with that can be contingent on the Giants offering more money, more upping that AAV to about $40 million a year. So it seems like if the Giants want to pay up, they can get Aaron Judge, and it would just be a matter of if the Yankees want to match it.
Yeah, although in Heyman's article, he quoted somebody saying, do you really think Judge is going to leave the biggest media market in the country to go play in a stadium where it's hard to hit home runs? And, that's a reasonable point too.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest point there. And, at least New York and California taxes are just as bad in both those areas. So I don't think that part will play into it. The other bit of news around the league, Zach Eflin, who was a former Dodger, traded for Jimmy Rollins, turned starter reliever, had a good role for the Phillies this postseason. He signed with the Rays. The Rays spent $13 million a year and gave it out a 3-year deal. So the Rays are changing the game.
Yeah, he got the same exact deal Tyler Anderson got, and Zach Eflin was not anywhere near the pitcher Tyler Anderson was last year, and so I think it makes the Angels signing of Anderson look pretty prudent, and maybe Anderson shot himself in the foot by jumping so early.
That's very possible. All right, that's all for today's episode. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen. Check out Locked On Sports today for your second listen. They got the biggest stories of the day, instant reactions, big game recaps, and take of the day available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, which is how you can find us. If you search for Locked On Dodgers, which is also how you can find us on social media, Twitter and Instagram, Locked On Dodgers. Jeff is on Twitter at Snider. I'm at Vince Samperio. DMs are open on all those accounts if you need to get a hold of us for a question, a topic, a comment, a concern. I know we had some audio visual sync up issues the other day on my episode, so we're working through that. I think it's a YouTube issue, but we'll figure it out. And yeah, you can send that all via DM. You can also send it via email, lockedondodgers@gmail.com, or you can send it via voicemail text at 323-863-5625. We're here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be with us when you get in your car. If you're at home, to your smart device, play podcast, Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. Have a good one.
We'll talk to you on Monday.